Hello Year 12 and welcome to Lesson 5 of our new topic, Lenin and the Civil War. And today we're going to draw together everything we've done over the past few lessons and use it to plan a piece of extended writing. As usual, you need to get yourself ready for the lesson. You are going to need the notes which you've been taking for the past 4 lessons. They're going to be really useful. So pause now and get everything that you need, and when you're ready, hit play again. In our last lesson, we were looking at how the Bolsheviks ended World War I by signing the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. So here are your 5 recall questions. I'd like you to have a go at them. Try not to use your notes for this. Do this from memory because we're working on improving our recall. When you're done, hit play and we'll check and mark the answers. So here are the answers, and it's time for you to mark them. When you're marking them, if you've missed something out or you've got something wrong, just make a correction, preferably in a different colour pen. And don't forget at the end to give yourself a mark out of 5. Pause now and mark them, and when you're ready, hit play and we'll move forward. So in today's lesson, we're going to plan a piece of assessment work all about how successful was Lenin in those first few months of Bolshevik rule. So we'll do some recap first of all of how the Bolsheviks managed to stay in power. Then we'll look at an assessment question on Lenin's early achievements in the years 1917 to 1918, and then we'll look at a model paragraph which analyses and evaluates, and you're going to use that as a guide to how you write your piece of extended writing. Now normally we would update our knowledge organisers at this point, but in today's lesson we're not going to cover any new content. However, we have covered quite a lot on this topic already, so just check that you've highlighted your knowledge organisers and that they're up to date. And then what you might want to do here is pause and just reread through the areas that we've already covered so that they're fresh in your mind. Your starter task today is to summarise how the Bolsheviks stayed in power in the first few months of Bolshevik rule. There are 4 big reasons that I'd like you to think about here. Firstly, strong leadership. Lenin provided strong leadership to the party. He took tough decisions in this period which were often unpopular with other Bolshevik leaders, but necessary for the Bolshevik government to survive. The Bolsheviks also took pragmatic decisions. They were quite flexible and willing to compromise on some of their principles in order to hang on to power. Thirdly, the Bolsheviks displayed a ruthless streak and were willing to use terror and violence to wipe out their opposition and terrorise their opponents. And lastly, the Bolsheviks were also helped by the fact that their opponents had weaknesses. The Bolsheviks' opponents were often too weak or unable to coordinate their opposition to the Bolsheviks effectively. I'd like you to pause the video now, and I want you to spend some time thinking about this. And for each big reason or factor, I'd like you to see if you can come up with 2 good examples or pieces of evidence which you could use to support that factor. When you're ready, hit play. Let's look now at some of the examples which you might have chosen. In terms of strong leadership, Lenin was determined not to share power with any other party, so he set up the Sovnarkom, dominated by Bolsheviks. He also showed strong leadership when he refused to form a coalition and compromise with other parties, and instead he went against the wishes of other leading Bolsheviks and sabotaged the coalition talks. We also saw that Lenin delivered strong leadership when he pressed the Bolshevik Party to agree to the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, despite the fact that its terms were so harsh. We've also seen some examples of Bolshevik pragmatism too. They allowed the peasants to take the land, even though it went against Marxist principles. We saw that they were willing to make concessions to the workers, introducing an 8-hour working day and allowing the workers to take control of their factories, even though in the long term this was not the vision which the Bolsheviks had for how industry should be run. We also saw how Lenin and some of the other leading Bolsheviks were willing to give up on their principle of worldwide revolution and prioritise the revolution in Russia above all else, making peace with Germany at any cost. In terms of ruthless methods and terror, we saw the Bolsheviks using class warfare to deflect the workers' anger and frustration at the bourgeoisie. We saw how they set up the Cheka under the leadership of Dzerzhinsky to hunt down internal enemies. The Bolsheviks arrested and banned other parties, particularly the cadets, but they also restricted what the Mensheviks and SRs could do, and they also banned the opposition press. And we saw Lenin used force to shut down the Constituent Assembly at gunpoint. We've seen weaknesses of their opponents as well. The opposition parties underestimated them and did not expect Bolshevik rule to last for very long. Our Mensheviks and SRs feared civil war, and therefore they were not prepared to use violence to defend the Constituent Assembly when Lenin closed it. We also know that in wider society, for many workers and peasants, they were too distracted with everyday issues to present any meaningful opposition to the Bolsheviks. Workers were more concerned with keeping their jobs and keeping their factories going, and peasants were more focused on the land issue than they were with the Bolshevik government. Now, your main task today is to complete a piece of extended writing. I want you to have a go at this 20-mark essay. How successfully did Lenin solve the problems facing the Bolsheviks in the period 1917 to 1918? Now, your last set of 20-mark essays were incredibly detailed and you worked really hard on them. This time around, I really want you to try to stick to the 40-minute limit when you're writing your answers. And that's because I want you to practice writing under timed conditions. So you can spend as long as you need to reading and planning, but when it comes to writing, only spend 40 minutes of really focused writing time. Here are the possible problems that you might write about in your answer. We've covered them all over the last few lessons. The only one that I don't want you to write about is land ownership, because we're going to look at a model essay paragraph on that in a moment. But you can choose any of the other problems. Here are your success criteria. As with all 20-mark essays, you need an introduction which sets out a clear line of argument, and this has become a real strength of your essays. The last round of 20-mark essays had excellent introductions. Your essay then needs to have 3 sections, each one focused on a different problem. So you won't necessarily tackle all of the problems in your answer, but you're going to pick 3. For each problem you write about, I want you to explain and analyse the problem and how Lenin tried to solve it. But you also need to evaluate how successful Lenin was in each area. And you'll reach a judgment at the end of each section about that. At the end of your answer, you also need to draw it together with an overall conclusion. So here's a model section to show you what you're aiming for. I've written about the land question. As you can see, I've started off by explaining the problem, saying how and why it was a danger to the Bolsheviks, and I've also set out what Lenin's solution to the problem was. Then I've tried to evaluate Lenin's solution, considering some of the advantages and disadvantages of the actions which he took. So there is some balance in this section. And then at the end of the section, I've reached an overall judgment about how far Lenin was successful here. You're going to need to pause the video and read this now, and I'd like you to refer to it when you're writing your own answers. And that brings us to the end of today's lesson. Good luck with writing your answers, and I'm going to look forward to reading your essays. If you need to check back on any of the previous content, remember all the lesson videos are on our YouTube channel.